Her mother's voice cut through the cathedral like a blade. "Claire, don't make a scene. This is bigger than you." 200 people turned to stare, not at the bride standing frozen in the aisle. At Claire, the daughter nobody had bothered to warn. Her own wedding flowers, her own church, her own guests. And there at the altar, wearing a dress Claire had never seen, stood Madeline, her sister, smiling. Their father wouldn't meet her eyes. Andrew, the man Claire had said yes to 8 months ago, sat in the third pew with his hands folded in his lap like he was waiting for a bus. If someone erased everything you sacrificed for the people you loved most, and then stood there asking you not to embarrass them about it, what would you do? This is Claire's story, and it starts at the moment her family decided she was expendable. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe and stay until the end, because this story is going to take you somewhere you didn't expect. Drop a like, and leave a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far Claire's story has traveled. Now let's go back to where it all broke open. The morning of what should have been her wedding day, Claire Whitmore woke before her alarm. That was nothing unusual. Claire had been waking before alarms her entire adult life. Before her parents needed something. Before a bill came due. Before another quiet crisis appeared at the edge of the family's carefully maintained surface. She lay in the narrow bed of her childhood room, staring at the water stain on the ceiling she'd been meaning to patch for 2 years, and felt something she couldn't quite name. Not excitement. Not nerves exactly. Something closer to relief. The particular relief of a woman who has spent so long waiting for her life to begin that she'd almost stopped believing it would. She was 34 years old. The dress was hanging on the back of the closet door. Simple. White. Not extravagant. She hadn't wanted extravagant. She'd wanted something she could actually breathe in. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from her mother, all from the night before. She hadn't listened to the voicemails. She told herself it was because she wanted one morning to herself. Looking back, she understood she'd been protecting herself from something she wasn't ready to hear. She showered, made coffee, and sat for 20 minutes at the kitchen table just holding the mug in both hands. The house was quiet. Madeline's room was empty. Her sister had stayed with friends the night before, which was fine, which was normal, which Claire had told herself meant nothing. She drove herself to the cathedral. That was the first thing she should have questioned. Her maid of honor, her college roommate Sandra, had canceled 3 weeks ago with a vague excuse about a family emergency that Claire had believed because she always believed people. Her cousin had offered to ride with her, but Claire had said it was fine, she was fine, she'd meet everyone there. She parked 2 blocks away because the lot was full. The lot being full should have been the second thing. She walked to the cathedral carrying her own bouquet in one hand and her small bag in the other, the white dress gathered in her fist so it wouldn't drag on the sidewalk. November in Boston had turned cold early. Her breath came out in thin clouds. Her heels made small, precise sounds on the pavement. She was 7 minutes early. She heard the organ before she reached the doors. Not tuning, playing. Full, sustained notes rolling out through the stone walls of the building, the kind of music that meant the ceremony had already begun. Claire stopped walking. She stood on the sidewalk outside the cathedral for what felt like a very long time, but was probably 4 seconds. Then she pushed open the side door and stepped inside. The cathedral was full. 200 chairs, nearly every one of them occupied. Flowers she had chosen, pale ivory roses, eucalyptus, trailing white ribbon, lined every pew. The candles she had ordered were lit. The string quartet she had paid a deposit on was playing something slow and formal at the front of the room. And at the altar, in a dress Claire had never seen, stood her sister. Madeline was 29. She was the kind of beautiful that made people forget what they'd been saying mid-sentence. She had their mother's cheekbones and their father's easy confidence and a laugh that filled rooms. She was also, as of that moment, standing at the altar of Claire's wedding wearing flowers in her hair and a gown that caught the candlelight in a way that made it obvious someone had put serious thought into it. Beside her stood a man Claire didn't recognize. Tall, dark-suited, the kind of posture that came from money, and the kind of jaw that suggested he'd never apologized for it. Claire's legs stopped working correctly. She caught herself on the doorframe. A woman in the last row. Someone's aunt, someone's colleague, a face Claire half recognized, looked at her, then looked away, like she didn't want to be involved in whatever was happening. Andrew was in the third pew, not at the altar. not beside the man Claire didn't recognize. In the third pew, on the groom's side, with his hands folded in his lap and his eyes pointed carefully forward, wearing a gray suit that was a shade too light for a November wedding. He felt her looking. He turned his head. He didn't get up. Claire's mother appeared from a side alcove. Margaret Whitmore moved with the efficiency of a woman who had spent 50 years managing the appearance of things. She was wearing a navy dress that cost more than Claire's monthly rent, and her expression was the one she used when something inconvenient had happened, and it was someone else's job to absorb it. "Claire," she said it very quietly. "Don't make a scene." Claire looked at her. She opened her mouth and nothing came out. "The ceremony is already underway," her mother said. I know it's not what you expected, but your father and I had no choice. The situation with the Hargrove account, you know how bad it's been, and Richard Cavendish's family offered to settle the entire debt if—" She paused, glanced at the altar. Madeline agreed. She understands the position we're in. "That's my wedding," Claire said. Her voice didn't sound like her voice. It sounded like something borrowed. "We used the deposits," her mother continued. "The church, the flowers, the caterer. It would have been wasteful to rebook. And the Cavendish family needed the ceremony this month, for estate reasons. Their attorney was very clear about the timeline. You replaced me." "Claire," her mother's voice sharpened. "Keep it together. There are people watching." There were people watching. Claire could feel them. The sideways glances, the very deliberate non-looking, the specific social discomfort of 200 guests who understood that something had gone wrong and had collectively decided that witnessing it was not their responsibility. Her father was at the front of the room. He was not looking back. Andrew was in the third pew. He was not looking back. Madeline was at the altar, and she did look back. Once, briefly. And what Claire saw on her sister's face was not cruelty, exactly. It was something closer to relief. The particular relief of someone who has been dreading a thing and found out they'd been spared it, and feels guilty about feeling relieved, and will file that guilt away somewhere they won't have to look at it. Claire's knees gave. Not dramatically, not in the way it happens in movies where someone crumples beautifully and the music swells. Her knees simply stopped holding her weight, the way a chair leg gives when the joint finally fails. Gradual, then all at once. And she went sideways into the aisle, and the bouquet hit the marble floor and scattered ivory roses across the stone. Nobody moved. 200 people sat in chairs and looked at the ceiling, at their programs, at their own hands, at anything that wasn't the woman folding onto the floor of her own wedding. Then a hand closed around her arm, firm, steady, not rushing her, not hauling her upright, just holding, the way you hold something that matters. A voice came from somewhere above and to her left, low and unhurried, the kind of voice that had clearly never needed to raise itself to be heard. "Easy," the voice said. "Take a second." Claire looked up. The man crouching beside her was somewhere around 50. Silver hair, well cut, dark suit. He had lines in his face that came from weather and time rather than worry, and eyes that were a particular shade of gray that made her think of lake water in January. He was not, she would later realize, the kind of man who typically crouched on cathedral floors. He was the kind of man other men watched to figure out what to do next. He'd been sitting in the last pew. She hadn't noticed him before. "Can you stand?" he asked. Not pitying, just asking. "I don't know," she said, which was the most honest thing she'd said all morning. "All right." He stayed where he was, one hand still on her arm, and looked at her with an expression she couldn't classify. Not sympathy, not pity, something more like recognition. "You don't have to do anything right now. You don't have to stand up until you're ready." Her mother's heels clicked toward them on the marble. "Vincent," her mother said tightly, "this really isn't—" "Margaret." He said the name the way you set something heavy down, flat, final. Her mother stopped walking. He knew her mother. Claire filed that away somewhere to examine later. "Claire." He was looking at her again, not at her mother. "I'm going to help you stand up. If you want to go, we go. If you want to sit here for another minute first, we sit here. What do you want to do?" What did she want to do? It was, she would later think, the first time anyone had asked her that question in longer than she could remember. Not what the family needed, not what the situation required, what she wanted. "I want to leave," she said. "Then we leave." He stood, and he kept her arm as she got her feet under her, and he walked with her up the aisle toward the doors. The organ continued. The ceremony continued. Nobody stopped them. Her mother made a small sound that might have been a word or might have just been air. Claire didn't turn around to see. She walked through the side door and back into the November cold, and the sound of the cathedral cut off as the door swung shut behind them. She stood on the sidewalk. Her bouquet was still on the floor inside. She hadn't picked it up. The man, Vincent, stood a few feet away, giving her space she didn't ask for, but immediately needed. He had his hands in his jacket pockets, and he was looking at the street, not at her, with the patience of someone who understood that sometimes a person needs a moment before they're ready to be looked at. A cab went past. Somewhere down the block a door slammed. The city went on doing what cities do, which is to say it did not notice or care. "Who are you?" Claire asked. "Vincent Callahan." He said it like it was simply his name, which it was, and like it might mean something to her, which it did, because she had heard it before. You couldn't live in Boston's upper-income neighborhoods for 34 years and not hear the name Vincent Callahan eventually. You heard it in certain kinds of conversations, the ones that stopped when someone new walked into the room. You heard it from her father, once, in a tone she'd never been able to fully interpret. "You know my mother," she said. "I know a lot of people." "Are you here because you knew?" She meant, "Did you know what they were going to do to me today?" He looked at her directly then. "No, I was invited. Your father and I have some business dealings. I came because declining would have been complicated." A pause. "I didn't know what the ceremony actually was until I sat down and read the program." The program, which would have had Madeline's name on it, and Richard Cavendish's, and none of Claire's. "Did everyone know?" she asked, and she heard the specific rawness in her own voice that she'd been trying to keep out of it. "Everyone who came today? Did they all know it wasn't—" "I don't know what they knew," he said. Honest, not softening it. "But I know what I saw, and I know that you were walking down that aisle alone." She had been walking down the aisle alone. She'd thought nothing of it, in the moment, because she'd wanted to. She'd wanted one walk where she wasn't managing something or carrying something or accounting for someone else's comfort. She pressed her hands flat against her dress and felt the cold air on her face and thought, "This is real. This is actually what just happened." "I paid for those flowers," she said. It came out strange, not angry, just bewildered. "I paid the deposit on the church booking 3 months ago. I picked every single centerpiece." "I know. They didn't even call me. They just—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "My mother called 3 times last night, and I didn't answer because I thought she was going to tell me I'd forgotten something." Vincent said nothing. He let the silence be what it was. "My fiancé is in there," she said. "He's sitting in the 3rd row watching my sister get married at my wedding. And he didn't even try to warn me." She laughed, and it wasn't a good laugh. "He couldn't even do that." "No," Vincent said quietly. "He couldn't." Claire looked up at the cathedral. Stone and stained glass and the faint sounds of music, muffled now, coming from inside. She thought about her father at the front of the room, who hadn't turned around. She thought about Madeline's face, that flash of relief that had disappeared so quickly. She thought about her mother's voice saying, "This is bigger than you." "She's right," Claire said. "That's the terrible part. My mother is right. It is bigger than me. It was always bigger than me. That's the whole point." "That's not what bigger than you means," Vincent said. She looked at him. "It doesn't mean the thing actually matters more than you do," he said. "It means they decided you were the one who wouldn't fight back." The wind came down the street and she felt it go through the thin fabric of the dress she'd chosen because she'd wanted something she could breathe in. She was cold. She was standing outside her own wedding in a dress that had been chosen for a day that no longer existed. And she was cold. And the man standing a few feet away from her had a steadiness about him that she couldn't entirely account for. "I don't have anywhere to go," she said. Not a plea. Just a fact, stated plainly, the way you state things when you've stopped having energy to arrange them more kindly. "You can come with me," Vincent said. "My car is around the corner. I have an estate outside the city. You'd have your own space, your own room, no obligation to talk to me or anyone else if you don't want to." He paused. "Or I can call you a car, and you can go wherever you need to go. Either way, you don't have to stand outside this building for 1 more minute." Claire looked at him for a long moment. "Why?" she asked. He considered the question seriously, which she appreciated. He didn't immediately deflect or reassure. He thought about it. "Because I've sat in the back of enough rooms," he said finally, "to recognize when someone has been made invisible by the people who are supposed to see them. And because walking out is harder than it looks, and you did it anyway." He looked at her steadily. "You don't have to stay where people have already decided you don't matter." The door of the cathedral opened behind them. A brief surge of organ music, and then it closed again. Someone came out, glanced at them, and walked quickly in the other direction. Claire looked down at her hands, at the dress, at the sidewalk, at the pale gray November sky above the rooflines of the street. She had spent 34 years being the responsible one, the one who didn't make things worse, the one who absorbed the cost so the people she loved didn't have to pay it. She had done this willingly, which she understood now was the most devastating part. She had done it willingly because she believed that love worked like accounting, that if she put enough in, eventually the balance would come back to her. She had been keeping the wrong books. She had been believing in a system that was never designed to pay out in her direction. She was 34 years old, and she was standing outside a church in a white dress she'd paid for herself, and the only person who had moved toward her when she fell was a man she'd never met before today. "Okay," she said. "Okay? I'll come with you." Vincent nodded once. No celebration, no reassurance, no performance of having done something kind. He simply turned and walked toward the corner, and after a moment she followed him, the sound of her heels on the pavement very small against the city noise, the distance between her and the cathedral growing with each step, until she turned the corner and the cathedral disappeared from view and she was somewhere new. She didn't know yet what that meant. She didn't know yet what came next. She knew only that she was moving, that she had chosen to move, and that the man walking beside her had asked what she wanted before he asked anything else. That was not nothing. In the years that came after, Claire would think often about that walk around the corner, about the specific quality of the November light, about the fact that she hadn't cried yet. Not on the sidewalk, not in the car, not for several hours afterward, because sometimes grief is so large that it takes time to find the edges of it. About the way Vincent Callahan had opened the car door without making a thing of it, and the way the city looked through the window as they drove out of it, and the way the silence between them was not uncomfortable, but simply honest. She would think about her mother's voice. "This is bigger than you." And she would think about what Vincent had said in response. "It doesn't mean the thing actually matters more than you do. It means they decided you were the one who wouldn't fight back." That woman, she was beginning to understand, was gone. The one who was going to take her place, she didn't know her yet, but she could feel her starting somewhere in the cold, in the movement, in the simple act of having chosen where she walked next. The city fell away behind them. The estate lay ahead. And Claire Whitmore, for the first time in 34 years, had no idea what was going to happen next, and felt distantly like that might be the closest thing to hope she had ever actually held. The estate sat 12 miles outside Boston, set back from the road behind iron gates and a line of old oaks that had been there longer than the house. Claire watched it appear through the car window without saying anything. She had been watching the city thin out into suburbs and then into the kind of quiet that only came with money and distance, and she had been thinking about nothing in particular, which was its own kind of mercy. The driver, a thick-necked man named Sal, who had not been introduced and had not introduced himself, pulled through the gates without slowing. The gravel drive curved. The house came into view. It was large, not ostentatious in the way that new money was ostentatious, all glass and deliberate angles, but large in the way that old stone gets large, by accumulation, by time, by the layering of additions built across generations until the thing had no single architectural logic but felt, somehow, entirely coherent. There were lights on in the lower window. There were birds on the lawn. Vincent got out first and opened her door before Sal could. "You don't have to figure out anything tonight," he said. "Mrs. Darrow will show you to a room. There's food if you want it. If you don't want to see anyone, you won't." "Who's Mrs. Darrow?" "She runs the house. She's been running it for 18 years. She will not ask you questions." He said it like it was a feature, which it was. Mrs. Darrow turned out to be a compact woman in her 60s with iron gray hair pinned flat and the specific expressionlessness of someone who had worked in a large household long enough to have seen things she'd decided not to have opinions about. She appeared at the front door before they reached it, looked at Claire's dress without any visible reaction, and said, "I've put you in the East Room. There's a bathroom attached. I'll leave a tray." "Thank you," Claire said. "You don't need to thank me." She said it without coldness, just as a fact. "Come on." The East Room had high ceilings and a window that faced the back garden. The bed was made with the particular tightness of a room that was always ready but rarely used. Claire sat on the edge of it in her wedding dress and looked at the window and thought about the ivory roses scattered across the cathedral floor. And then she stopped thinking about them because there was a limit to how much a person could hold at one time. She did not cry. She ate half the food on the tray Mrs. Darrow left. She changed out of the dress, folding it carefully out of some reflex she couldn't explain, and hung it on the back of the closet door, and then she lay on top of the covers in her underwear with the lights on and stared at the ceiling until sometime around 3 in the morning when she fell asleep without meaning to. She woke to the sound of birds. Not an alarm. Birds. Actual birds. Outside the window, carrying on the way. Birds carry on in November when the cold hasn't fully settled yet, and they are still, somehow, finding things to say. Claire lay there for a moment and let herself believe for just that moment that she was somewhere normal, waking up in a normal way. Then everything came back and she sat up. The dress was still on the closet door. She found clothes in the dresser, not hers, but her size. Women's clothes, practical and plain, nothing flashy. She would ask about that later. She washed her face and pulled her hair back and went looking for coffee. The kitchen was at the back of the house, large and functional, smelling of bread that had already been baked. Vincent was at the table with a newspaper and a coffee mug, still in the clothes from the day before. He looked up when she came in. "There's a pot," he said, nodding toward the counter. "Mrs. Darrow starts it at 6. Claire poured herself a cup and sat down across from him without being invited to, because she had passed the point of needing invitations to sit in a kitchen. "The clothes in the dresser," she said. "My daughter's. She's grown and doesn't live here anymore. She's roughly your size. I had Mrs. Darrow put some things in there last night in case." He paused. "I can have your own things sent from your apartment if you give me the address." "My apartment lease is up in 2 weeks," Claire said. "I was supposed to be moving into Andrew's place after the—" She stopped, picked up the mug. "After." Vincent looked at her over the paper. He didn't say anything. "I need a plan," she said. "I don't function without a plan." "All right. I have some savings, not a lot. I've been covering my parents' shortfalls for 3 years, which took most of what I was putting aside. I have a professional background in accounting and financial management, which is currently unattached because I left my last position to prepare for the move." She heard herself cataloging it the way she'd always cataloged crises, clinical, sequential, her voice steady, even when her hands weren't. "I need work. I need housing. I need to not be sitting in someone else's house living off their charity." "It's not charity. It feels like charity. I understand that." He folded the paper. "I have a business proposition, if you want to hear it." She looked at him. "A business proposition." "My legal holdings have been expanding for 3 years. Import, real estate, 2 manufacturing concerns. The financial management has been handled by an outside firm that has been, to put it plainly, skimming and covering it badly." His tone was the same as if he were talking about the weather. "I found out about it 4 months ago, and I've been looking for someone to replace them since. Someone internal, someone I can trust, someone who knows how to look at a set of books and see what's actually there." "You don't know me." "I know you paid your parents' debts for 3 years and held their finances together while they used your wedding to close a business deal." He looked at her steadily. "That takes a specific kind of competence, and a specific kind of patience, both of which I need." Claire turned the mug in her hands. "You're offering me a job." "I'm offering you a position, with a salary, with your own office and access to all records. You'd live here because the commute question is complicated and because I have the space, but you draw a separate housing allowance against your salary, so it's on the books." He paused. "If you find in a week that it's not what you want, you leave with 2 weeks severance and I help you find something else. No obligation, no strings." "You don't do things without strings," Claire said. "Men like you don't." Something moved in his face. Not offense, more like acknowledgement. "No, but the strings in this arrangement are financial and professional, and you can see all of them in writing before you agree to anything." She looked at him for a long moment, I want to see the books first, she said, before I agree. I want to see what I'm actually walking into. He nodded. That's fair. And I want it in writing. Obviously. She drank her coffee. He picked up his newspaper. Outside, the birds were still going. Why did you come to the wedding? She asked. You said declining would have been complicated, but you didn't have to stay. Your father needed something signed. I was going to do it after the ceremony. Did you sign it? No, Vincent said. I left. She thought about that. About what it meant that he'd left a deal he needed signed to walk her out of a cathedral. She decided not to examine it too closely. Not yet. Not today. All right, she said. Show me the books. The next 3 days were the closest thing to peace Claire had experienced in longer than she could account for. Not happiness. She was nowhere near happiness. But the specific quiet of a person who has been given a problem large enough to require their full attention, which was the only vacation her particular mind ever actually took. The books were, as Vincent had described, a disaster. Not chaotic, worse than chaotic, because chaos at least had the honesty of disorder. These were clean on the surface, organized and cross-referenced and formatted correctly, and deeply, methodically wrong underneath. The way a building can look structurally sound right until the moment it isn't. She sat in the office he'd given her, a room that had been a library, still had bookshelves along 2 walls, had a window overlooking the side garden. And she went through 4 years of records with a yellow legal pad and a sharpness she hadn't felt in months. She made notes in the margins of her notes. She cross-referenced against industry benchmarks she pulled up on the laptop. She found the first significant discrepancy on the morning of the second day, and felt the specific grim satisfaction of a person who has found the thing they were looking for. She brought it to Vincent at noon. Your import concern, she said, setting the printout on the desk in front of him. Your supply chain manager has been billing you for 43% more product than you receive. The overpayment has been routed through 2 shell accounts registered in Delaware, which is why your external firm didn't catch it, or they caught it and said nothing. Vincent looked at the printout. His expression didn't change. That was the thing about his expressions. They didn't change. They adjusted, in increments so small you could miss them if you weren't paying attention. His jaw tightened by approximately 2 millimeters. How long? He asked. 14 months. Amount? She told him. He looked at the number. Then he looked at her. You found this in 2 days. It's not hidden well. It's hidden confidently, which is different. People who hide things confidently assume no one is going to look hard enough to find them. My previous firm looked at these books every quarter. I know. He let that sit in the air between them. Find the rest of it, he said. She found the rest of it. It took 4 more days, and what she found was worse than the first thing. And there were 3 parties involved, not 2, and one of them had a name that made Vincent go very quiet, in a way that Claire understood meant the conversation was over, and something else was beginning. She didn't ask about it. She put everything in a report and gave him the report and went back to the books. On the 7th day, her phone rang. She'd been letting calls go to voicemail. From her mother, 3 times. From a number she didn't recognize, twice. From Andrew, once, which she'd stared at for the full duration of the ringing before letting it stop. This call was from Madeline. Claire sat with the phone in her hand and watched her sister's name on the screen and felt a complicated series of things she didn't have words for. She answered on the 4th ring. Claire. Madeline's voice was wrong, too careful. The voice of someone who has rehearsed an opening and is using it now. I need to talk to you. Okay? I know you're angry. I know you have every right to be angry. I just need you to hear me out. I'm listening? A pause. He's not... Richard isn't what Mom said he was. She made it sound like a business arrangement, like it would be straightforward, but he... Madeline stopped. Claire heard something in the silence that she classified carefully and set aside. Can I come see you? How did you get this number? Mom has it. Mom has my cell number. This isn't my cell number. Another pause, longer. Andrew gave it to me. Andrew, who had Claire's cell, her email, her home address, her parents' address, the location of every important thing in her life, because she had given those things to him over 8 months of an engagement and never thought twice about it. Andrew, who was apparently still in contact with Madeline 5 days after the wedding that Claire had not attended her own. Why do you have Andrew's number? Claire asked. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. Claire, why do you have Andrew's number, Madeline? The pause this time was the worst kind. The kind that isn't thinking about what to say, but deciding how much to say. We've been talking, Madeline said, for a while. Nothing happened. I want you to know that. Nothing actually happened. Claire put her hand flat on the desk, felt the wood grain under her palm, pressed down. How long is a while, she asked. 6 months, maybe. It was just talking, Claire. Stop. She heard her own voice come out of someplace below her sternum, flat and dense. Stop right there. I know how it sounds. You've been talking to my fiancé for 6 months. She said it slowly, tasting each word. While I was paying your parents' debts, while I was planning a wedding, She stopped, breathed. And then you stood at my altar. I didn't know they were going to do it like that. I didn't know about the wedding until 2 weeks before. When Mom told me about the Cavendish arrangement, I tried to... Did you try to call me? Silence. Did you try to warn me, Madeline, once in 2 weeks? Mom said it would be better if I showed up and found out in front of 200 people. Claire's hand was pressing so hard on the desk the wood was making a sound. That's what would be better, according to Mom. I'm sorry. And she was. Claire could hear it, the specific texture of genuine remorse, which was somehow worse than if it had been hollow. I'm sorry, Claire. I was scared and I was selfish and I didn't think about what it would do to you, and I'm sorry. Claire looked out the window. The side garden was gray in the November light, the grass flattened from a frost that had come the night before. You said Richard isn't what Mom said, Claire said finally. What does that mean? A beat. He has a temper. It's been less than 2 weeks and he's already... She stopped again. I think I made a mistake. You think? Claire, please. I need help. I don't know who else to call. The thing about love, the particular maddening, indefensible thing about it, is that it does not care very much what it should do. Claire knew, with the full clarity of a woman sitting alone in someone else's library, with her hands pressed flat against a desk, that she had every justification in the known world for hanging up the phone. For saying, I'm sorry, Madeline, I wish I could help you. For saying you should have thought about this before. For saying a great many things that were true. She said none of them. I can't come get you right now, she said. But don't tell Mom where I am. Don't tell Andrew. Don't tell anyone. Okay. Madeline exhaled. Okay. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. She hung up and sat there for a moment. Then she got up and went to find Vincent. He was in the back hallway, jacket off, on the phone, speaking in a voice she hadn't heard before. Low and absolutely certain, the kind of voice that leaves no space for the other person to push back. He saw her come in and raised one finger, finishing the sentence he was on, and ended the call. I need to tell you something, she said. All right. My sister called. She's in trouble. She says her husband has a temper and things have already gotten difficult. She watched his face. She might need a place to go. I'm not asking you to make that decision right now. I'm telling you because this is your house, and you have a right to know what I'm potentially bringing into it. He looked at her for a moment. Does she know where you are? No, I didn't tell her. Good. He picked his jacket up off the chair. Keep it that way until you know more. How much do you trust what she told you? I trust that she's scared, Claire said. I trust that less than I trust her math. Something shifted in his expression. That's careful. She's been talking to my ex-fiancé for 6 months, Claire said, and she stood at my altar. I love my sister. I don't currently trust her. He was quiet for a moment. That's honest. Yes. They stood in the hallway. Outside, the wind had picked up. Claire could hear it against the windows, the particular sound of November saying it was done being mild. The supply chain manager, she said, because she needed to not think about Madeline for a minute. What are you going to do? Handle it. If you need documentation, I can prepare a summary that doesn't show it came from your internal review, something that could be provided to... I don't need documentation, he said, and then, reading her expression, added, not because of what you're thinking, because I'm going to go talk to him directly, and after that he is going to be very motivated to return what he took and disappear. That's not legal. No, he agreed, but it's faster, and the money comes back, which the legal route may or may not achieve in a year and a half. He looked at her. If that's a problem for you, tell me now. She thought about it, actually thought about it. Not the performed deliberation of someone who had already decided, but the real kind. Is anyone going to get hurt? He's going to be frightened, Vincent said. Significantly, but no. She nodded once. Okay. He raised an eyebrow slightly. Just okay? I've spent my whole professional career watching people steal from each other through legitimate paperwork, Claire said. I'm not going to pretend the legitimate version is morally superior just because it takes longer. He was quiet for a moment. Then something happened at the corner of his mouth that wasn't quite a smile, but was in the neighborhood of one. It was the first time she'd seen that. She went back to the library and the books, and she was halfway through the second import account when she heard a car on the gravel outside. She looked up and out the window. A car she didn't recognize, dark, expensive, idling in the drive. After a moment it left. She watched the drive until it was empty again and then went back to the numbers. That evening, Mrs. Darrow brought dinner to the library without being asked. You don't have to do that, Claire said. I know I don't, Mrs. Darrow said, setting the tray down. She looked at the papers spread across the desk, the legal pad covered in Claire's small, tight handwriting, the empty coffee mug. First person to use this room in 2 years, she said. Did it belong to someone? His wife used it. She said it simply, no preamble. Eleanor, she was an architect. She did her drafting in here. Claire looked at the room differently then. The bookshelves, the window angle, the way the light came in. When did she die? 6 years ago. Cancer. Mrs. Darrow picked up the empty mug to refill it. He kept the room exactly the way she left it until about a year ago. Then he had it cleared and said to make it into something useful. She paused at the door. He didn't come in here himself. He had me do it. She left. Claire sat with that for a while, and then she went back to work. And outside the window, the dark came down fast and early, the way it does in November. And somewhere in the house behind her, she heard footsteps, and then she heard them stop, and then she heard nothing, and she kept working. 3 days after Madeline's call, the second car appeared on the gravel drive. This one didn't leave. Claire was crossing the front hall when she heard the bell, and Mrs. Darrow went past her to the door, and Claire stopped when she heard the voice that came through before the door was fully open. I want to speak to my daughter. Her mother. Margaret Whitmore walked into the front hall of Vincent Callahan's estate the way she walked into every room she'd ever entered, like a person who had never been turned away from anything and was prepared to be surprised if today was different. She was wearing the camel coat, the good one, the one she wore when she needed to project seriousness. Her eyes found Claire across the hall immediately. There you are, she said, like Claire was a thing that had been misplaced. Mrs. Whitmore. Mrs. Darrow's voice was polished and final. You don't have an appointment. I don't need an appointment to speak to my daughter. This isn't her house to invite you into, Mrs. Darrow said, and it isn't yours. Her mother looked at Mrs. Darrow with the expression she used on people she considered obstacles. I'd like to speak to Vincent. Mr. Callahan isn't available. Then I'll wait. You won't, Mrs. Darrow said. You'll leave your number and someone will be in touch. Margaret turned to Claire. Her voice shifted, softer, more private, the tone she used when she wanted something and had calculated that warmth was the more efficient tool. Claire, sweetheart, I know you're upset. I understand that. But I need you to come home. Your father needs to talk to you about the Hargrove account, and there are some things you don't know yet, about the Cavendish arrangement, about why we had to— I know why, Claire said. You know what you think you know. There's more to it. There always is, Claire said. There's always more to it. There's always a reason. There's always a thing I don't fully understand that would make it make sense if I just listened. She moved toward the front door and opened it wider. I don't work for the family anymore, Mom. I'm not available. Her mother's face did something complicated. You're living in this man's house. You work for him now, after 1 week? Less than a week, Claire said. And yes, you don't know what he is. I know what he did, Claire said. When I fell on the floor of that cathedral, he was the one who moved. Nobody else moved. You told me not to make a scene. She held the door. Goodbye, Mom. Claire. Goodbye. Margaret Whitmore stood in the doorway for a moment with the particular expression of a woman who has just discovered that the lever she's been pulling for 30 years has disconnected from the mechanism. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes moved around the hallway. At Mrs. Darrow, at the house, at her daughter's face, which was steady in a way it hadn't been before. She left. Claire closed the door. She stood there with her hand on the door for a moment, and her chest was moving faster than normal, and her eyes were burning, and she pressed her lips together hard until both things passed. Mrs. Darrow said nothing. "Thank you," Claire said finally. "I don't allow people in this house who haven't been invited," Mrs. Darrow said. "That's just the rule." She walked back toward the kitchen. Claire stood alone in the front hall, and she was shaking slightly, the kind of shaking that happens when a person does something that their body recognizes as significant, even if their mind is still catching up to it. She had said no to her mother. She had held a door open and said goodbye and meant it. She had done it in under 2 minutes without raising her voice. She had never done that before. Not once. Not in 34 years. Vincent appeared from the direction of his study. He must have heard. He didn't ask what had happened. He looked at her face and looked at the door and understood the shape of it. "You all right?" he asked. "No," she said honestly. "But I will be." He nodded. He started to turn back toward his study, and she said his name, and he stopped. "The car on the gravel," she said. 3 nights ago. The dark one that sat for a minute and then left." She watched his face. "That wasn't random, was it?" He held her gaze. "No." "Is it connected to the supply chain situation?" "It may be connected to someone who was informed of the supply chain situation before I was ready for them to be," he said. "There are people who don't want the accounting restructured because the current mess suits them. People who would come to your house. People who would send a car to my house," he said, "to see who's here, to see what's changed." His voice hadn't shifted. It was the same voice he'd used to discuss the weather, to discuss the books, to discuss everything. But she was starting to read the things behind it. "I'm going to ask you to stay inside the property for the next week, not as a guest, as a precaution." The words sat between them. "How serious is this?" Claire asked. "Manageable," he said. "But I won't tell you it's nothing." She looked at him for a long moment. The library was waiting. The books were waiting. Her sister's voice on the phone was waiting. "I think I made a mistake." And her mother had just left through the front door, and Andrew had been talking to Madeline for 6 months, and the ivory roses were still scattered, somewhere in her mind, across a marble floor she would never fully stop seeing. She had walked through a door 1 week ago, and there was no walking back through it. "All right," she said, "inside the property." And the look that crossed his face then was brief and unperformed and gone almost before it arrived, but she caught it, and it was something she had not expected from a man like Vincent Callahan. It was relief. The week passed the way weeks do when a person is working hard enough to keep their mind occupied, in the rhythm of early mornings and late nights, and the specific tunnel vision of a problem that keeps revealing new dimensions the closer you look at it. Claire found 2 more discrepancies in the import accounts, then a third, smaller one, buried in a quarterly reconciliation that had been formatted to look like a rounding error. She documented all of it with the methodical patience of someone who had learned early that the only way to win an argument with numbers was to have more of them than the other side. Vincent reviewed everything she brought him without comment, which she was starting to understand was his version of approval. The dark car did not return. She watched the gravel drive from the library window more than she would have admitted, but it stayed empty, and after 4 days she stopped watching and just worked. On the 8th night, there was a fire in the east garden. Not a dangerous fire, a contained one, a metal drum near the far wall, the kind of fire someone makes when they need to burn documents or simply need something to look at in the dark. Claire saw it from her window at 11:30, and she stood there in the dark of her room watching it for a long moment before she put on the coat Mrs. Darrow had left on her chair 2 days ago and went outside. Vincent was standing beside the drum with his hands at his sides, not warming them, not doing anything in particular, just standing there the way a person stands in front of a fire when they've run out of other options for the evening. He heard her come up on the gravel and didn't turn around. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "I sleep fine," he said, which she was beginning to understand meant he didn't sleep much. She stood beside him at a distance that was neither close nor pointed. The fire was burning something that smelled like paper and something else she didn't identify. The night was cold and clear, and the sky above the estate had more stars than you could see from the city. Mrs. Darrow told me about Eleanor, she said. I hope that's all right. He was quiet for a moment. What did she tell you? That she used the library, that she was an architect. A pause. That you had the room cleared last year. He looked at the fire. I kept it the same for 5 years. Everything exactly where she left it, her drafting table, her pencil sets, her models in the shelves. He was speaking without inflection, the way people speak about things they've organized into something manageable. Then one morning I walked past it and I understood that I wasn't keeping it for her anymore. I was keeping it to keep myself from having to decide what came next. What did you do with her things? I have them. They're in storage. I didn't throw them away. He glanced sideways at her. I'm not good at throwing things away. That's not a flaw. It is when it becomes a reason not to move. They stood with the fire between them and the cold at their backs, and Claire thought about a man spending 5 years walking past a room that had been preserved like evidence, and she thought about herself spending 34 years paying a debt that was never going to be forgiven because it was never about the debt. I owe you something, she said. He looked at her then. You don't owe me anything. I've been here almost 2 weeks. You've housed me, employed me, managed my mother at your front door, and kept me inside your property during what you will still not tell me is a serious situation. She looked at him directly. And you haven't asked me for a single thing. I hired you to fix my books, he said. You're fixing them. That's the arrangement. That's not all it is. He was quiet. I'm not saying that to push anything, she said. I'm saying it because I've spent my whole life pretending not to notice when someone was being decent to me, because if I noticed it, I'd have to figure out what to do with it. She looked back at the fire. I'm noticing it. The fire cracked. Something in the drum shifted, settled. Eleanor was sick for 2 years before she died, he said. I spent those 2 years trying to fix it the way I fix other things. Money, connections, every specialist in 3 states. It doesn't work that way. He was quiet for a moment. After she died, I told myself I'd had my one good thing, that it would be obscene to want another one. Claire said nothing. I'm telling you this because you said something honest to me, he said, and I'm not good at being the only one who isn't saying something. She looked at him in the firelight, at the lines in his face and the gray in his hair, and the steadiness he carried like a coat he'd worn so long he'd forgotten it was there, and she felt something move through her that she was not ready to name. I should go back in, she said. Yes, he agreed. Neither of them moved for another 3 minutes. Then she went back inside and lay on the bed in the east room and looked at the ceiling and thought about a man who believed he'd already had his one good thing, and she thought about this very carefully before she told herself to go to sleep. She went to sleep. In the morning, everything changed. It started with a phone call to Vincent at 7:15, which she didn't hear but whose aftermath she walked into when she came down for coffee and found him standing at the kitchen window with his back to the room and his shoulders carrying something new. Mrs. Darrow was not in the kitchen. That alone told Claire something. What happened? She asked. He turned around. His face was the same as always and completely different. Andrew Collins filed a civil complaint yesterday evening, he said, against you. The coffee pot was in her hand. She set it down. What kind of complaint? Breach of contract. He's claiming you took money from a joint account that was established during the engagement period and failed to disclose it as marital property in the dissolution. He watched her face. He's also made a secondary allegation to your former employer that you misappropriated client funds in your last position. The kitchen was very quiet. That's not true, she said. I know. I've never had a joint account with Andrew. We discussed it and agreed to keep finances separate until after the wedding. There's no joint account because we never opened one. Her voice was steady in the way that voices get steady when something is happening too fast for the body to react to it properly. And my former employer, I left that position voluntarily with 2 weeks' notice and a clean record. I know, he said again. Then why? She stopped, thought. She was an accountant. She thought in structures. She started building the structure of this. He needs me discredited, she said slowly. If I'm under civil litigation and there's an allegation of financial misconduct, anything I've documented here becomes questionable. Any testimony I give about my family's finances becomes questionable. If someone wanted to make me useless as a witness, or make you leave, Vincent said. She looked at him. If you're frightened and destabilized and dealing with a legal situation, you leave, he said. You're not a threat to anyone's financial arrangements if you're gone. Who benefits from me leaving? He didn't answer immediately, which was its own answer. My father, she said. She heard her own voice say it and felt it land somewhere in her chest that had not been used in a while. He needs me not here. He needs me not looking at books and not talking to you and not... She pressed her hand against the counter. He's connected to whoever you're having the supply chain problem with, isn't he? Claire, how long have you known? He looked at her. I found out 2 days ago that your father has a financial relationship with the man who's been stealing from my import account. They're not partners. He's more of a guarantor. Your father's name is on a loan agreement that would become complicated if my accountant investigation leads to a prosecution. 2 days ago. 2 days ago he had known and not told her, and she stood in his kitchen and felt the specific devastation of that particular calculation. He had been protecting her, she understood that. He had been deciding how and when to tell her, and protecting her from the information in the meantime, and she understood all of that, and it did not help at all. You should have told me, she said. Yes, he said. I should have. No justification, no explanation, just the agreement, flat and clean. She nodded once. She picked up the coffee pot and poured the cup she'd come down for and drank half of it standing at the counter. Is there actually a complaint filed? She asked. Or is this a threat? It was filed. It's real. You need a lawyer today. I don't have money for a lawyer. I'll arrange. No, she said. Fast. Firm. No, I'll handle it myself. I have documentation of my employment records, my financial history, my bank accounts for the past 5 years. I have emails from Andrew agreeing to keep finances separate. I have... She stopped. I have everything. Because I keep everything. Because I grew up in a family that rewrote history when it suited them, and I learned very young to document things. He was looking at her with the expression she couldn't classify. I'm not helpless, she said. It came out sharper than she meant it. I know you're not, he said, and I'm not leaving. Something settled on his face. I know that too. She took the rest of her coffee to the library, and she was halfway through drafting the first responsive document when her phone rang. Not her mother, not Madeline. Andrew. She stared at his name on the screen. Then she answered it. You filed a complaint against me, she said, instead of hello. He was quiet for a half-second too long. Claire, I know how that sounds. Tell me how it sounds. Your father. He came to me, okay? He said there were things you'd done financially, things he could prove, and that if I didn't cooperate with the complaint, he was going to... He stopped. He was going to what, Andrew? He has documentation, Andrew said. He says he has records that show you were moving family money into a personal account for 3 years. He's going to give it to your former employer if I don't... What documentation? Her voice was a blade. I managed family accounts for 3 years because my parents couldn't keep their finances straight. And every time they couldn't make a payment, it came to me. I have the bank transfers. I have the emails asking me to cover things. I have everything. Claire, you've known me for 2 years, she said. You were going to marry me, and when my father showed you a piece of paper, you believed it. Silence. Why? She asked. Tell me honestly, why? He exhaled. Because it was easier, he said finally, than the alternative. Which was? Then standing up to your father, then telling him no, then... He stopped. His voice changed, went quieter, more uncomfortable. I'm not good at conflict, Claire. I never was. You knew that. I knew you were conflict-averse, she said. I didn't know it extended to filing false civil complaints against the woman you were engaged to. He told me you had money put away, that the legal thing would be resolved quickly, that it was just to get you to come home, she said, to make me come back, to get me out of this house and back where he could manage me. She laughed. It was not a good laugh. It was the sound of something crystallizing. My father sent you to do this. He's going to cause real trouble for you, Andrew said. He told me he has connections at the Financial Licensing Board. He could have your credentials reviewed. He could let him. She said it without even pausing. Let him do every single thing he just threatened, because I have 6 years of bank statements and written requests from him and my mother asking me to transfer money for them, and every single one of those transfers was documented and authorized, and I will put every piece of it in front of every regulator in the state if he wants to go that route. She pressed her hand against the desk. Is there anything else? Claire, I'm sorry. About the wedding. About all of it. I should have called you. Before. I should have. Yes, she said. You should have. She hung up. She sat very still for a moment. Her hand was shaking. She pressed it flat against the desk until it stopped, and then she picked up her pen and kept writing. By noon, she had a 13-page response document. By 2, she had assembled the supporting financial records into a secondary file with an index. By 3:30, she had emailed both to the attorney whose name and number Vincent had left on a piece of paper outside the library door sometime mid-morning, without knocking, without saying anything, just left it there. She found Vincent in the back of the house, in a room she hadn't been in before, a sparse room with a table and chairs and maps of the city pinned to one wall that she didn't look at too closely. He was with Sal and a second man she didn't know, and all three of them looked up when she came in. I've sent the response documents to your attorney, she said, and I need to tell you something about my father's financial relationship with your supply chain problem. Because if it's what I think it is, there's a way to deal with both things at the same time. Sal looked at Vincent. Vincent looked at Claire. All right, he said. The second man, lean, 40s, watchful, in the way that certain people are watchful when they've spent time in rooms where information was currency, got up and offered her his chair without being asked. She took it. My father's name is on a loan agreement guaranteeing a portion of the import contracts, she said. That means his liability is contingent on those contracts remaining active. If the contracts are audited and the fraud is formally documented, his guarantee is called in. He can't cover it. He doesn't have the money. He's been insolvent for 3 years, which I know because I've been covering the gaps. She looked at Vincent. But if you don't pursue the formal documentation, if instead you make it known through the right channels that you are aware of the fraud, that you have evidence, but that you're giving a window for voluntary settlement. He comes to the table, Vincent said. He comes to the table. My father comes to the table. And when they come to the table, you have the leverage to dictate terms, including the withdrawal of the civil complaint. She paused. It takes the legal route off the board and replaces it with a private arrangement, which is faster and doesn't require my credentials to be under review for 18 months. The room was quiet. Sal said something under his breath in a language Claire didn't speak. Vincent was looking at her with an expression she'd never seen on his face before. Sharp, evaluating, the look of a man recalibrating something. You just built a negotiating strategy using your own family as leverage, he said. I built a strategy using accurate information, she said. The fact that some of it involves my family is not my problem. They made it not my problem when they filed a false complaint against me. The second man said, She's right, it works. Vincent looked at the map on the wall. His jaw was doing the 2mm thing. If your father understands that I'm the one offering the window, he'll know you told me about his guarantee. Yes, she said. He'll call it a betrayal. He used my wedding to close a business deal and then filed a false legal complaint to get me back in line, Claire said. I think we're past the point where his definition of betrayal is worth much. A long silence. Do it, Vincent said to the second man. Not to Sal, not to Claire. The second man nodded and left the room. Sal followed. Claire and Vincent were alone in the room with the maps. You know he'll come here, Vincent said. Your father, when he understands. I know. Are you ready for that? She thought about it honestly. She thought about her father's face at the front of the cathedral, turned away. She thought about his voice on the phone asking her to cover this payment, that shortfall, just this one thing, just one more time. She thought about the complaint with her name on it and Andrew's signature and her father's hand behind it. No, she said. But I'm going to do it anyway. He looked at her for a moment, then his phone rang, and he answered it, and she went back to the library. The call from Madeline came at 5:30, and this time the voice was different, not rehearsed, not careful, just cracked open, the voice of someone who has been holding something behind their teeth for too long and can't anymore. Claire. He found the phone. Claire was out of her chair before the sentence ended. Madeline. He went through my things. He found the number I've been calling. He knows I talked to you. He knows I... Claire, he's very angry. I don't... A sound in the background that Claire couldn't identify, and then Madeline's voice dropped to almost nothing. I need to leave. Tonight. I can't stay here tonight. Where are you right now? Bathroom. Upstairs. Is he in the house? Yes, he's downstairs. Claire pressed the phone hard against her ear. She could hear Madeline's breathing, uneven, shallow, the breath of someone operating on adrenaline and suppressed panic. Listen to me, she said. I'm going to figure this out. Do not leave the bathroom until I call you back. Can you do that? Yes. Don't make any noise. Don't open the door. Give me 10 minutes. She hung up and walked fast to the room with the maps. Vincent was there alone now, at the table with a phone and a notepad. My sister is in trouble, Claire said. Right now, tonight. Her husband found out she's been calling me, and he's in the house and she's hiding in a bathroom. He looked up. I need help, she said. I'm asking. It was the first time she had asked him for something directly. They both knew it. He picked up his phone. He made a call that lasted 45 seconds and consisted of an address, a name, and 3 words Claire would remember later. Make it clean. They'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. She'll be safe. Claire nodded. She went back to the hall and called Madeline back and talked her through the next 20 minutes. When to leave the bathroom, what to take, what to say or not say, how to walk out of a house where a man was angry without making it worse. She stayed on the phone until she heard Madeline say, "There's a car outside," and then until she heard the car door close, and then until Madeline said, "I'm out, I'm in the car," and she exhaled a breath that had been sitting in her chest for 20 minutes solid. "You're coming here," Claire said. Is that okay?" Claire thought about what she'd told Vincent. I love my sister. I don't currently trust her. She thought about Andrew's number in Madeline's phone. She thought about the 6 months. She thought about a woman hiding in a bathroom with shallow breath. And she thought about what it felt like to be on the floor of a cathedral and have no one move. "Yes," she said. "It's okay." Madeline arrived at the estate an hour later, carried there by 2 of Vincent's men in an unmarked car, with a small bag and a bruise along her left cheekbone that she tried to angle away from the light when she came through the door. Claire saw it anyway. She didn't say anything about it. She took Madeline to the kitchen and sat her down and put food in front of her that Madeline didn't eat, and tea she did. And she sat across the table from her sister and looked at the bruise and thought about a word for what she was feeling that wasn't love and wasn't fury and wasn't grief and was somehow all 3. "I know what I did to you," Madeline said. She was looking at the table. "I know I don't have the right to be here." "You're here," Claire said. "I should have called you. When Mom told me about the arrangement, I should have called you the minute I found out." "Yes. I was scared." Her voice was thin. "I know that's not an excuse. I know it doesn't—" "Stop," Claire said. "Stop explaining it. I understand it. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. Both those things are true." Madeline looked up. Her eyes were red and her mascara was a memory, and the bruise was sitting there on her face like an accusation aimed at the wrong person. "Andrew," Claire said, "how long were you really talking to him?" Madeline pressed her lips together. 8 months, she said. "Not 6. I told you 6 because—" She stopped. Because 8 was harder to say. 8 months. For 2 of those months, Claire had been engaged to him. They had been having dinner at his apartment and talking about joint finances and looking at neighborhoods, and she had been telling herself that this was it. This was the person who was going to choose her, and for 2 of those months he had been talking to her sister. "Did he tell you he was going to step aside?" Claire asked. "When my parents asked him to?" Madeline said nothing. "Did he tell you before the wedding?" Still nothing. Madeline. "Yes," her sister said, very quietly. "He told me 3 days before. He said he thought it was the right thing to do, that the family needed it." She was crying now, silent tears she seemed barely aware of. "I told him to call you. He said your father had asked him not to." 3 days. For 3 days before she walked down the aisle alone, Andrew had known, and Madeline had known, and nobody had called. Claire sat with that information and let it settle into the bones of her understanding the way concrete settles, slowly, irreversibly, becoming the new foundation of the floor she was standing on. "I'm not going to pretend this is fine," she said. "I'm not going to tell you it's okay because it's not okay. It may not be okay for a very long time." "I know. But you're not going back to that house, and you're not going back to Richard." Claire looked at her sister's bruised face. "He will not touch you again." Madeline broke then, fully and completely, The way people break when they've been holding everything in place through pure will, and someone finally says the thing they needed to hear. She put her hands over her face and shook with it, and Claire sat across the table and watched her and felt the complicated love of it, the damage and the history. And the two women sitting in a kitchen that belonged to neither of them, held there by a man neither of them had known 3 weeks ago, with the whole shape of their family scattered around them like something that had been dropped and couldn't be put back together in its original form. She didn't go around the table. She let Madeline cry. After a while, Madeline stopped. "What are we going to do?" she asked. "We're going to sleep," Claire said, "and tomorrow we're going to figure out the next thing." She put Madeline in the room across the hall from hers and went back to the library, and she sat at the desk in the dark without turning on the lamp. And she looked at the window and the November dark beyond it, and tried to count what she had. She had her documentation. She had Vincent's position. She had the response document already filed. She had her sister safe in a room down the hall. She had the plan she'd built that afternoon in the room with the maps, the one that used her father's own leverage against him. She had all of it. And then the email came. She saw it on her phone, from an address she didn't recognize, which she would have ignored, except the subject line read, "You should know what he told the board." She opened it. It took her 11 seconds to read it and another 30 to read it again. The email contained a document, a letter, on letterhead she recognized. The Financial Licensing Board's official letterhead, the board that governed her professional credentials in the state of Massachusetts. The letter was dated 4 days ago. It contained a detailed account, attributed to a credible source, of alleged misconduct during her employment at Hargrove Financial Management, the position she had left voluntarily 18 months before she came to the estate. The alleged misconduct was specific. It named accounts. It named amounts. It named dates. Every piece of it was fabricated with enough accuracy that whoever had built it knew exactly how she worked. They knew the account structures. They knew the reporting periods. They knew the names of the clients. They knew because her father had given it to them. 3 years of her managing her parents' finances. 3 years of her having access to their records, their contacts, their account relationships. 3 years of her being the responsible one, the one who fixed things, the one who knew where everything was. 3 years of information she had given them in good faith, and they had taken it and built a lie from it that was detailed enough to be believed. Her credentials were not just under civil review, they were being formally investigated by the licensing board. If the investigation proceeded, she could lose her certification. Without her certification, she couldn't work. Without work, she had nothing. No independence, no income, no ground to stand on. Everything she'd built since she walked out of the cathedral came down to those credentials. And someone had understood that, had calculated it exactly, and had moved against it 4 days ago while she was sitting in this library thinking she was winning. She sat in the dark with the phone in her hands. Her father had not come to the table. He had gone around the table entirely and taken the floor out from under her. She sat there for a long time, long enough that the cold came through the window glass and she felt it on her arms through her sleeves, long enough that somewhere in the house she heard a clock strike 10 and then 11, long enough that the fire Vincent had built in the east garden had long since gone cold. Then she got up. She went to Vincent's study and knocked. He opened the door immediately, which meant he hadn't been asleep either. She held out the phone with the email on the screen. He took it and read it, and his face did the thing it did. The jaw, the 2 millimeters, and something else, something beneath that, something she recognized as controlled fury because she was feeling it herself. "He moved 4 days ago," she said, "while we were building the strategy. He already knew what we were going to do and he moved first." Vincent looked at her. "My strategy doesn't work anymore," she said. "The leverage only functions if I'm credible. If my credentials are under formal investigation. Anything I've documented here is tainted. The response filing becomes questionable. The records I've assembled become the work of someone with a pending misconduct allegation." She heard her own voice, steady, absolutely steady, the steadiness of a woman who has passed through anger and come out the other side into something colder and more functional. "He didn't just try to bring me home. He tried to destroy every tool I have." She looked at Vincent Callahan, the man who sat in the back of every room, the man who caught her when she fell, the man who had read the books that she had fixed, and she said the things she had never said in 34 years of being the one who handled things. "I need you to tell me what to do." Vincent read the email twice. He handed the phone back without a word and walked to his desk and stood there with his back to her for a moment that lasted about 10 seconds, but felt considerably longer. Then he turned around. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He didn't. He moved to the window and stood there the way he'd stood at the fire. Not restless, not pacing, just thinking with his whole body the way some men do, the weight of cognition visible in the set of his shoulders. The study was lit by a single lamp on the desk. The rest of the room was shadow and the faint sound of the wind outside. "Your father has a lawyer," he said. "The board complaint didn't happen without legal counsel. Someone drafted that letter and filed it through proper channels, which means someone was paid, which means there's a paper trail back to a billing address. Finding the lawyer doesn't solve the credential problem." "No," he agreed, "but it tells us who your father is working with and whether they're working with anyone else. You think he has partners in this? A man who's been insolvent for 3 years and is guaranteeing loans for a supply chain fraud doesn't operate alone. He operates because someone is holding him up." He looked at her. "The question is whether that person is the same person who sent the car 3 weeks ago." Claire turned that over. "If my father is being held up by the same person you have the supply chain problem with, then your father isn't the one running this," Vincent said. "He's a piece. Someone pointed him." She sat with that. The lamp on the desk threw a circle of yellow light across the floor between them, and outside the window the November night was absolute. "There's a man named Garrett Holt," Vincent said. His voice changed slightly. Not in volume, in texture. Flatter. The way a voice goes when it's talking about something that has weight. "He runs 3 import concerns out of Portland and has interests in financial licensing oversight boards in 4 northeastern states. He and I have had competing interests for 7 years. He's been buying his way into positions of regulatory influence for the last 4. He has someone on the licensing board. Almost certainly. And my father, your father needed capital 18 months ago. Holt provided it through the loan guarantee arrangement, which is how your father's name ended up on the supply chain contract." He looked at her steadily. "When you arrived here and started restructuring my accounts, someone told Holt. Holt told your father to remove you. Your father tried the civil complaint, which was Holt's attorney. And when that wasn't fast enough, Holt moved directly through the board." The full shape of it assembled in Claire's mind with the cold clarity of a balance sheet coming into alignment. Not her father acting alone. Her father acting as an instrument, pointed at her by a man who had a financial interest in her not being exactly where she was and not doing exactly what she was doing. "He's not trying to bring me home," she said. "He's trying to remove me from your operation." "Yes." "Because I found the fraud. Because you found it and documented it and built a response structure that, as of this afternoon, had a reasonable chance of exposing Holt's entire arrangement." He came away from the window and sat in the chair across from her. Not behind the desk, across from her, at the same level. "You built something today that frightened a man I have been trying to get leverage on for 7 years. She stared at him. "The strategy you outlined in the map room," he said. "The voluntary settlement window. It was the right move. And it scared him enough that he moved against you within hours. That doesn't help me if my credentials are suspended pending investigation." "No," he said. "It doesn't." He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. "Here's what I can do. I have a relationship with 2 members of the State Financial Oversight Committee. Not the board itself, but the committee that supervises the board. I can make it known, through appropriate channels, that the complaint against you was filed under improper influence. That won't kill the investigation, but it will put a flag on it, slow the timeline, and make the board aware that they're being watched." "How long does that buy? 60 days? Maybe 90? What do we do with 90 days? "We get Garrett Holt on record," Vincent said. "Not criminally. That takes too long. Civilly. If I can document that Holt directed the filing of a false regulatory complaint as a business tactic to interfere with my operations, I have a tortious interference case that puts his regulatory relationships under scrutiny. The board members he's been cultivating don't want that kind of examination. They'll distance themselves. When they distance themselves, the investigation loses its teeth." Claire was quiet for a moment, building it. "To document that he directed the filing, you need either the communication between Holt and my father or the communication between Holt and the board member." "Yes." "My father has those communications." "Yes." She looked at Vincent. He looked at her. I have to talk to my father, she said. Not talk, Vincent said. Your father is past talking. He's afraid of Holt, which means he's not going to voluntarily give you anything that implicates Holt, because Holt is the hand that's been feeding him. He paused. But there are things your father values more than Holt's goodwill. What does my father value more than money? His wife's comfort, Vincent said. His reputation in the circles he still operates in. And I would guess, the faint possibility that one of his daughters might eventually forgive him. The room was quiet. You want to use that, Claire said. I want you to use it, he said, differently than he used you. He treated your love for your family as a lever to pull. I'm asking you to treat his love for his family as a door to knock on. He held her gaze. There's a difference. There is, she said. I'm not sure he deserves the knock. He probably doesn't, Vincent said, but you're not doing it for him. She looked at the floor, at her hands, at the edge of the lamplight on the carpet. Set it up, she said. Get him here. Her father arrived at the estate the following afternoon. He came without her mother, which surprised her, and without a lawyer, which surprised her more. He came in his own car, the old Volvo, not the BMW he'd had to sell 18 months ago. And he parked on the gravel and he sat in the car for 4 minutes before he got out, which Claire watched from the library window. He looked smaller than she remembered. That was the thing that hit her first, before anything else. Thomas Whitmore had always occupied space with the particular confidence of a man who expected the room to adjust to him. He was tall, silver-haired, handsome in a way that had aged into distinguished, and he had a voice that carried easily and a handshake he'd built a career on. But the man who got out of the old Volvo and walked toward the front door of the estate had the gait of someone whose certainty had been quietly leaking out for some time, and who had not yet fully reckoned with how much was left. He was 58 years old, and he looked it for the first time. Mrs. Darrow put him in the front sitting room. Claire made him wait 11 minutes, not out of cruelty, but because she needed that time to arrange what she was going to say, and because some part of her understood that the woman who walked into that room needed to be different from every woman she'd been before in every room her father had been in. She went in without Vincent. She had asked him not to come. This is mine, she'd told him that morning. He hadn't argued. Her father stood up when she came in. That was new. He had not, in her memory, stood up when she entered a room. He had nodded, or acknowledged her from his chair, or sometimes just continued his conversation with whoever else was in the room. He stood up now, and she watched him do it, and she sat down across from him and waited. He sat. You look well, he said. Dad, she said. Don't. He closed his mouth. I'm not here to hear that I look well, she said. I'm here to talk about Garrett Holt and what you did to my credentials and what I need from you to fix it. His jaw moved. She watched him cycle through several approaches. She could see them, could track them with the familiarity of 34 years, could identify the moment he considered sympathy and discarded it, considered authority and discarded it, considered explanation. He settled on explanation. The situation with Holt predates all of this, he said. By 2 years. I made a business arrangement that... The term shifted, Claire. Things I agreed to changed after the fact, and by the time I understood the full scope of what I'd signed, I was already liable, she said. Committed, he corrected. Those aren't different things, Dad. He pressed his hands together on his knees. His knuckles were prominent. She noticed that his wedding ring was looser than it used to be. When Holt told me you were working for Callahan, his reaction was not moderate. He told me that you were going to expose the supply arrangement, and that when that happened, my guarantee would be called immediately, and we'd lose the house. He looked at her. Your mother can't... He stopped. She doesn't know the extent of it. I've been managing what she knows. You've been lying to her. I've been protecting her. Those aren't different things either, Claire said. Something moved across his face. Not anger, something closer to recognition. What did Holt tell you to do? She asked. He said to bring you back. That if you were out of Callahan's operation, the accounts would stabilize. Callahan would hire someone else, and it would take months to reconstruct what you'd already built. He said the civil complaint would be enough. Her father's voice was flat now, the cadence of a man reciting something he's ashamed of. It wasn't enough. So he went to the board. He has a relationship with a man named Prescott on the board. He called Prescott directly. I didn't... His voice caught slightly. I didn't know he was going to do that until after. Did you tell him to stop? Silence. Dad, did you call Holt and tell him to withdraw the board complaint? It's not that simple, he said. When Holt does something for you, I'm not asking about Holt's expectations, Claire said. I'm asking if you made one phone call to one man and said, stop what you're doing to my daughter. Yes or no? The silence went on long enough to be its own answer. She looked at her father, at his prominent knuckles, and his loosened ring, and the Volvo in the drive, and the 8 years she had spent covering shortfalls, and making calls, and absorbing costs. And she felt something she had not expected to feel, which was not rage. Not anymore. She had passed through rage somewhere in the library in the dark the previous night and come out on the other side into something cleaner and more useful. I need the communications between you and Holt, she said. All of them. Starting from when he first approached you about the loan arrangement. Emails, texts, any recorded calls, any documents he sent, everything. Her father stared at her. If I give you that, he loses his leverage over you, she said. Because the moment those communications become part of a legal filing, the arrangement that's been holding your guarantee becomes a liability for him, not for you. He doesn't want that examined any more than you do. When the investigation turns toward him, he will not spend resources defending a guarantee on a man he already used as a tool. He'll walk away from it. And my debt? Still exists, she said. I'm not fixing your debt. I'm fixing my credentials. Those are two different things, and you're going to have to live with that distinction. He looked at his hands. What about the house? I don't know, she said honestly. That depends on how fast Holt moves when he realizes you've cooperated. But I'll tell you this. If you give me what I'm asking for, Vincent Callahan becomes someone who owes you a degree of goodwill. And in Boston, that's worth more than most things. Her father was quiet for a long time. She waited. She had become, she realized, very good at waiting. Your mother cried, he said finally. It came out without preface, without context. After the wedding, after you left, she came home and she sat at the kitchen table and she cried for 2 hours. He was looking at his hands. She didn't cry when Madeline left. She organized. She made calls. She managed it. A pause. With you, she sat there. That's not an apology, Claire said. No. He looked up. I know it's not. Then what is it? I don't know, he said. I don't know how to... He stopped. His voice was doing something she hadn't heard from him before, a roughness that sat below the words. You were the one who always fixed things. I told myself you were strong enough to handle it. I told myself that so many times I stopped checking whether it was true. The room was quiet. It wasn't strength, Claire said. It was the fact that I didn't believe I had any other choice. Those are not the same thing. He nodded, just nodded, like the words had gone into him somewhere. The communications, she said. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out a USB drive and set it on the table between them. She looked at it. I copied everything last night, he said, after your man called me. He glanced toward the door, meaning Vincent, meaning the invisible force of Vincent's name in the city. I've been carrying it since this morning trying to decide. What decided you? He looked at her face. You don't look like someone who needs me anymore, he said. That's what decided me. His voice was strange, not bitter, something more complicated. You used to look at me like I was the one who knew things. Since you came in here, you've looked at me like I'm a problem you're going to solve. He held her gaze. I did that. I made you look at me that way. She picked up the USB drive and held it. Goodbye, Dad, she said. Not cruel, not warm, just the truth of it, stated simply, with the particular clarity of a woman who understood that some relationships do not end in a moment, but have been ending slowly over years, and this is simply the first time she has said the thing out loud. She walked out. In the hallway, she passed the drive to Vincent without stopping, and she went to the library and she sat at the desk, and she pressed her hands flat and breathed for a long time, and nobody came in. What happened next happened fast. Vincent's attorney received the USB drive at 4 that afternoon. By 6, the attorney had reviewed enough of the contents to confirm what Vincent had suspected. Garrett Holt's communications with Thomas Whitmore contained explicit instructions to file both the civil complaint and the board referral as strategic interference tools. The language was specific enough to constitute evidence of tortious interference in 3 separate jurisdictions. More importantly, there were two messages from a man the attorney identified in 40 minutes as the board member Prescott, sent through an encrypted service that had been messily, carelessly, copied to an email chain that included Holt's personal account. Prescott was on record. The attorney made two calls, the first to Prescott directly, the second to the chairman of the Oversight Committee. By 8 that evening, the formal investigation of Claire's credentials had been placed on administrative hold, pending a review of the circumstances surrounding the filing. Claire found out when the attorney called her directly at 8:43 and used the words administrative hold, and she sat in the library and held the phone after the call ended, and felt the specific physical sensation of a structure she hadn't realized she'd been bracing against suddenly releasing. Her shoulders dropped by approximately 2 inches. She hadn't known they were up. She went to find Vincent. He was in the kitchen, which was not where she expected to find him, standing at the counter with a glass of water and his jacket off, and his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows. He looked up when she came in. "I heard," he said, "administrative hold isn't a resolution." "No, but Prescott will resign from the board within 2 weeks. When he resigns, the complaint loses its advocate. The investigation closes." He set the glass down. "Holt is going to know by tomorrow morning that you have the communications. He'll move to settle the import account fraud before it reaches formal documentation." "My father's guarantee?" "Holt will walk away from it. It's the least of his problems now." He held her gaze. "Your father is not going to lose the house." She breathed. "I told him I wasn't fixing his debt." "You weren't. I was." A pause. "Separately, as a function of the settlement arrangement." She looked at him. "You were going to do that without telling me." "I was going to tell you afterward." "Why not before?" "Because you needed to have that conversation with your father without it being about something I was doing for him." He looked at her steadily. "It had to be yours." She sat down at the kitchen table. Her legs had decided they were done. Vincent poured a second glass of water and set it in front of her and sat across from her, and they were back to the kitchen table. The two of them, the same configuration as the first morning, except that everything between then and now had accumulated into something that changed the texture of the air. "What does Holt do now?" she asked. "He cuts his losses and finds another arrangement in another city." Vincent's voice was flat. "Men like Holt don't stop. They relocate." "You're not going to—" "No," he said. Not elaborating, just no, clean and final, and she believed him. She drank the water. Outside the kitchen window, the night was absolute, the kind of dark that only exists when you're far enough from the city that the sky has no competition. She could see stars. She'd been seeing stars every night for 3 weeks and still wasn't used to it. "I want to talk about what happens next," she said. "All right. The import account work is mostly done. There are 2 smaller supplier accounts I haven't finished, and the real estate holdings need a full audit. But that's a month of work, maybe 6 weeks. She was looking at the table. "After that, I don't have a reason to be here." The kitchen was very quiet. "I'm not asking you to invent one," she said. "I want to be clear about that. You've done more than I can account for. And I'm not saying that to perform gratitude. I'm saying it because I need you to know that I know it." She looked up at him. "But I need to know what we are. Not what this is. What we are. Because I've been living in the middle of something for 3 weeks and I'm not—" She stopped. "I'm not good at not knowing." He looked at her for a long moment. "I'm 50 years old," he said. "I have a history that is not clean. I have debts of a different kind that I've been paying for 20 years, and some of them are not fully settled. I'm in the process of walking away from an organization that does not always let people walk away easily." He was very still. "I told myself I wouldn't say anything to you until that walk was complete, until there was nothing behind me that could reach you." "That's a decision you made for me," she said. "Yes." "Without asking me." "Yes," he said again, owning it. She looked at him. "What would you have said if you'd decided to ask me instead?" He was quiet for a long time. The clock on the wall moved through it. She waited. "That you walked into this house 3 weeks ago, and you were the most careful, most controlled, most organized person I'd met in years," he said, "and that I could see how much work it was, how much work you were doing just to keep standing." His voice was the same steady instrument it always was, but there was something underneath it now, something she could hear because she had been listening to him for 3 weeks, and she knew the difference between his register when he was presenting information and his register when he was saying something true. And I kept thinking, what would she be if she wasn't doing all that work? What's underneath all that management? He held her gaze. I kept wanting to know. The kitchen light was warm and the night was outside and her sister was asleep upstairs and the estate was quiet around them in the specific way of large houses at night, all that space holding its breath. Eleanor, she said. Eleanor is not a reason, he said. She's part of who I am. She's not a wall I built. Some people build them without realizing. Some people do, he agreed. I've been checking. He looked at her steadily. The room. The library. I had Mrs. Darrow clear it because I wanted to see if I could walk past it without stopping. I could. That was a year ago. He paused. When you started using it, I stopped walking past it. I went to the door 3 times in the first week and then I stopped going to the door. She thought about Mrs. Darrow's voice. He didn't come in himself. He had me do it. What were you doing at the door? Nothing, he said, just standing there. She looked at him and felt something that was not quite any word she had for it, but was the intersection of several of them. The warmth that came with being seen, and the vertigo that came with not being used to it, and the animal caution of a person who had been wrong before and knew it. I'm not Eleanor, she said. No, you're considerably more argumentative. She laughed. It came out before she could stop it, real and startled and short, and she watched his face as it happened, watched the thing at the corner of his mouth that wasn't quite a smile move closer to actually being one, and the distance between them across the table felt different than it had 60 seconds ago. I need to know that Madeline is going to be okay, she said. Before anything else, I need to know the situation with Richard Cavendish is handled. She has a meeting with a family attorney tomorrow morning, he said. The divorce petition will be filed this week. Cavendish is not going to contest it. How do you know? Because his attorney called mine this afternoon, Vincent said, and expressed that his client was eager for a clean resolution. After you made it known he was a problem, after I made it known that his behavior toward a woman under my protection had been noted, Vincent said, inappropriate company. She thought about what that meant, practically, in the circles Vincent Callahan moved in. She thought about Richard Cavendish getting a phone call or a visit, or simply a shift in the temperature of certain rooms when he walked into them. She thought about a man who believed he could hit a woman in his own house and face no consequence, suddenly understanding that he had miscalculated his position. Thank you, she said. You don't need to. I'm thanking you, she said. Let me. He was quiet. You're welcome. She pushed back from the table and stood, and she stood there for a moment with the table between them, and she thought about a man who went to a door 3 times and then stopped, and she thought about a woman who had spent her whole life being chosen last by people who should have known better, and she thought about the specific recklessness of deciding to trust something when you have very good reasons not to. The 2 supplier accounts, she said, and the real estate audit. I'll finish them. I know you will. And when they're done, we'll figure out the rest. He looked at her. That's not a resolution. No, she agreed. It's a plan. That's what I have. The corner of his mouth. Definitively a smile this time, brief as it was. All right, he said. She went back down the hall toward the library because there were still things to finish, and she had never been a woman who left things unfinished, and she was halfway down the hall when she heard footsteps behind her, and she turned around. Vincent was standing at the end of the hall. The man who came to this house for the wedding, he said. Your former fiancé. She waited. He called my office this morning. He wants to speak with you. She felt something move through her chest. Not love. Not exactly. Something more like the ghost of a feeling, the echo of something that had been real once and was now simply scar tissue. What did you tell him? I told him that whether you spoke to him was your decision and that the decision could be communicated through your own phone on your own time. He paused. But I thought you should know he called. Why did he call your office? Because he doesn't have your new number. A pause. And possibly because he knew calling mine was a way of communicating something in addition to the message. What was he communicating? Vincent held her gaze across the length of the hall. That he knows where you are, that he knows who you're with, and that he hasn't decided yet what he thinks about it. She considered that. I don't care what Andrew thinks about it, she said. No, Vincent agreed. but it means he's still paying attention. And men who are still paying attention sometimes take actions that require managing. She nodded, filed it, added it to the list of things that needed handling, which was getting longer and more complicated every day, and which, she had come to understand in the 3 weeks since she walked out of a cathedral, was simply what it looked like when your life was actually happening instead of being managed from the outside. "Good night," she said. "Good night, Claire." She turned and went back to the library. She turned the lamp on and sat at the desk and pulled up the supplier accounts and found her place in the numbers and started working. And it was 11:30 at night on a Wednesday in November when the phone on the desk rang. Not her cell, the landline, the one that rang in the library specifically and nowhere else in the house. The number she had not given to anyone because she had not known it herself until 10 days ago. And she picked it up and heard a voice she did not recognize. A man's voice, unhurried and pleasant in the way that certain kinds of dangerous men are pleasant. And the voice said, "Ms. Whitmore, my name is Garrett Holt. I think it's time you and I spoke directly." Her hand tightened on the receiver. She looked at the door, closed. She looked at the window, dark. She looked at the numbers on her screen and the documentation she had spent 3 weeks building and the USB drive that had come from her father's pocket and was now in an attorney's hands in a downtown office. She did not call for Vincent. "Mr. Holt," she said. Her voice was even. "I've been expecting you." The silence on the other end lasted precisely 3 seconds. "Have you?" he said. "Yes," she said. "I have one question before we start." "Go ahead." "Is this call being recorded?" A pause. Then, almost despite himself, something that might have been appreciation in his voice. "It is now," he said. "Good," Claire said. "Then let's make sure we say the right things." Outside the library window. The night was deep and cold, and the stars were out, and the estate was quiet around her. And 3 weeks ago she had been standing on a cathedral sidewalk in a white dress with nowhere to go. And now she was sitting in a dead woman's library with a phone against her ear, and 3 weeks of documentation in an attorney's office, and a man who had been trying to destroy her professional life on the other end of the line waiting to find out what kind of woman she actually was. She was about to show him. The call lasted 41 minutes. Claire knew because she watched the clock on the wall above the bookshelves, the way you watch something you need to document, the minute hand moving in its small arcs, while Garrett Holt's voice came through the receiver in its pleasant, unhurried rhythm, the voice of a man who had spent decades in rooms where pleasantness was the most effective weapon. He opened with an offer. That was the first thing she noted. Not a threat, not an ultimatum, an offer. Reframe the accounting documentation as incomplete preliminary findings. Allow the supply chain audit to conclude with a negotiated settlement figure significantly below the actual fraud amount. In exchange, the board complaint would be withdrawn, the civil case would be quietly dropped, and Thomas Whitmore's guarantee would be restructured into a long-term payment arrangement that would not require the sale of any assets. He made it sound reasonable. I was very good at making things sound reasonable. Claire let him finish. She didn't interrupt once, which she could tell slightly unsettled him because men like Holt were accustomed to people interrupting, with objections, with counteroffers, with the nervous filler of people who couldn't tolerate silence. She let the silence sit and she kept her eyes on the clock, and she breathed steadily through everything he said. When he was done, she said, "That's a generous offer." "I think so," he agreed. "It would also require me to file falsified professional documentation with a licensed legal entity, which is a felony in this state." A pause. "The documentation would simply reflect preliminary findings as preliminary findings." "Mr. Holt," she said, "I've been recording this call since the moment you confirmed the recording. I told you that at the start, which means the offer you just made, which constitutes an inducement to commit document fraud, is currently on record." She kept her voice the same even instrument it had been for 40 minutes. "I'm going to give you the same window I would have given you 2 days ago before you went to the licensing board. Voluntary settlement. Full fraud amount returned to Callahan Holdings within 30 days. Your communications with board member Prescott are already in the hands of the Oversight Committee. That action is done and you can't undo it. What you can do is decide whether the next 6 months of your professional life are spent settling or defending." The silence this time was different. Not the silence of a man thinking, the silence of a man recalibrating. "You're 34 years old," he said. His pleasantness had thinned slightly at the edges. Yes, she said. And you've been in that house for 3 weeks. 22 days. You understand that what you're doing has consequences that extend past your accounting work, he said. That the relationships I have in this city are what? She said. Mr. Holt, I grew up in this city. I understand what you're implying. I also understand that you called this number, which means you're trying to reach a settlement before the Oversight Committee meeting, which is in 4 days, which means your window is actually considerably shorter than 30 days. She paused. I'd suggest calling your attorney tonight. She hung up. She set the phone down on the desk and her hand was shaking so hard the receiver rattled against the cradle. She pressed both hands flat on the desk surface and held them there and breathed through her nose. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. The way she'd taught herself to breathe during her mother's worst financial crises. During the worst months of managing accounts that should never have needed managing. During every moment she'd ever had to hold herself together when coming apart would have been the more honest response. The shaking stopped. She got up and went to the door and opened it. Vincent was in the hallway. Not leaning against the wall, not pacing, not doing anything dramatic. Standing in the hallway with his arms at his sides and his jacket on. Like a man who had heard a phone ring and decided that where he needed to be was outside that door. She looked at him. He offered a deal, she said. I told him to call his attorney. Vincent looked at her face for a long moment. At her hands, which were still. At her expression, which was something she couldn't see from the inside, but which she understood from the way he looked at it, was not the expression of someone who needed to be held together. The recording, he said. I have it. He nodded. I'll have the attorney file a preservation notice tonight. Good. They stood in the hallway. The house was quiet. The clock in the library was still ticking. I need to sleep, she said. Yes. We'll deal with the rest of it tomorrow. Yes, he said again. She walked past him towards the east room and he didn't follow, and she lay on the bed with the lights off and the window open an inch at the top to let in the cold, and she stared at the dark ceiling and waited for sleep, and it came faster than she expected, pulling her under cleanly, and she did not dream. Garrett Holt's attorney called Vincent's attorney at 7:15 the following morning. By 9, the framework of a settlement agreement was on the table. By noon, the number, the full fraud amount, as Claire had documented it, not a negotiated reduction, had been confirmed in writing as the basis for settlement. Holt's attorney spent 4 hours trying to introduce qualifications, partial payments, extended timelines. Vincent's attorney spent 4 hours removing them. Claire sat in the library with the supplier accounts and worked through both of the remaining files and completed the real estate audit preliminary review and tried not to think about the calls being made in offices she couldn't see. At 4 in the afternoon, Vincent came to the library door. Settlement signed, he said. She looked up from the screen. Full amount, 30-day wire transfer. Holt's attorney has indicated his client will not contest the Oversight Committee's review of the Prescott relationship. He paused. Prescott resigned from the board an hour ago. Medical reasons, according to the statement. She turned her chair to face him. My credentials. The hold will be lifted by end of week. The complaint has been formally withdrawn. He held her gaze. It's done. She sat with that. Done was a word she had not associated with many things in her life. Her parents' finances were never done. The family's needs were never done. Andrew had not been done, apparently, for at least 8 of the months she'd thought he was hers. Things in Claire's life had a way of not being done, of continuing past the point where they should have resolved, of requiring one more intervention, one more adjustment, one more sacrifice. This was done. Okay, she said. Okay? Give me a minute, she said. I'll be okay in a minute. He left the doorway. She turned back to the window and looked at the side garden, at the gray December light falling across the flat grass, at the bare trees at the garden's edge, and she felt something move through her chest that she couldn't classify and didn't try to. It moved through and then it was gone, and she was still sitting in the chair, and the desk was still in front of her, and the work was still on the screen. She went back to work. That evening, Madeline came to the library. She knocked, which she hadn't done before. Claire looked up and said, "Come in," and Madeline came in and stood near the door with her arms crossed over her chest, not defensively, but in the way of someone who is cold and also not quite sure of their footing. The bruise on her cheekbone had faded to yellow at the edges. The divorce petition had been filed. Richard Cavendish had, through his attorney, indicated his full cooperation with an uncontested dissolution. And Madeline had received this information with the particular numb relief of someone who has been braced for a fight and found out they don't have to have it and doesn't entirely know what to do with that yet. I spoke to the attorney again today, Madeline said. She thinks we can have it finalized in 60 days. That's fast. He wants it done. He wants it over. Her voice was flat. He doesn't want anyone looking at how he handled the first 3 weeks of the marriage. Claire nodded. I'm going to stay here until it's final, Madeline said. It's still fine, Claire said. Madeline stood in the doorway. She was quiet for a moment in the way she was quiet when she was building up to something she'd been sitting with. I talked to Andrew, she said. Claire looked at her. He called me. He wanted to know if you were all right. I think he wanted me to convey it because She stopped. He knows you won't take his calls. I won't. He said he was wrong. Her voice was careful. He said a lot of things were wrong and that he's been sitting with it and he doesn't expect anything. He just wanted you to know. She watched Claire's face. I'm just telling you what he said. I know, Claire said. Do you want to talk about it? Not right now, Claire said. Maybe not ever, but not right now. Madeline nodded. She started to leave and then she stopped, one hand on the doorframe, and she turned back around and her face had the look it got when she was going to say something she'd been working up to for longer than this conversation. I've been trying to figure out how to say I'm sorry in a way that means something, she said, and I keep coming back to the fact that there isn't a way. There isn't a version of sorry that's big enough for what I did. She was looking at Claire directly now, not angling away. I knew. When Mom told me about the Cavendish arrangement, I knew what it meant, and I was relieved that it was you and not me, and I need you to know that I know that about myself. I'm not going to pretend I didn't know. The library was quiet. I know you knew, Claire said. I've known that since the day you called me. Are we? Madeline stopped. I don't know what we are right now. We're sisters, Claire said. That doesn't change. What it looks like for a while might be different. She held her sister's gaze. You're here. You're safe. That's what matters right now. The rest of it we figure out as we go. Madeline's eyes went bright. She pressed her lips together. Okay, she said, very quietly. Okay, Claire said. Madeline left. Claire turned back to the window and the garden and the December dark coming down through the bare trees, and thought about two women who had been raised in the same house and turned out so differently, and yet here they were in the same borrowed room at the end of the same catastrophic year, both of them more intact than they had any right to be. She went back to work. The real estate audit took 9 more days. The supplier account review took 6. By the time she handed Vincent the completed documentation package, 4 files, indexed, cross-referenced, with a summary memo that laid out findings and recommended structural changes in plain language. It was the 14th of December, and snow had come to the estate in the night, and the garden was white and still. He read the summary memo at the kitchen table over coffee the next morning, while she sat across from him and looked at the garden through the window. He read it the way he read everything, thoroughly, without comment, turning the pages with the steady deliberateness of a man who understood that the fastest way to read something properly was not to rush it. When he was done, he set it down. This is 4 months of work, he said. 23 days, she said. I work fast when the books are bad enough. The real estate holding in Gloucester, he said. You recommended I sell it. It's generating negative return and the market is favorable. You're carrying it for sentimental reasons, which is not a financial strategy. He looked at her. My father built that property. I know, I said sentimental. I didn't say wrong. She held his gaze. I said what I thought. You can decide what you do with it. He was quiet for a moment. That's the last file. Yes. Then technically your engagement here is complete. Technically, she said. The kitchen clock, the snow outside, the steam coming off the coffee mugs. I'm not going to make you a speech, he said. I don't make speeches. I know. But I want to say something, and I want to say it plainly. He set the memo to one side. His hands were on the table, very still. I have been walking away from the organization I spent 20 years building for 3 years. It has been, he paused, choosing the word, complicated. Not because I regret the walk, because the walk requires that certain debts be settled and certain relationships be formally ended, and some of those relationships don't end cleanly. I know, she said. I've been watching you do it. There are 2 remaining obligations, he said. I expect them to be concluded by February. After February, there is nothing behind me. And then? And then I'm a 60-year-old man with legitimate businesses and a house that's too large for one person and a library that someone recently reminded me can be used as a library again. He held her gaze. I'm not asking you to wait for February. I'm telling you what February looks like. What you do with that information is yours. She looked at him across the kitchen table, at the man who had stood up in a cathedral when no one else moved, who had given her a library and a salary and a door that locked and had not once, in 23 days, asked her for anything except the work she'd already agreed to do, who had gone to a door 3 times and then stopped, who had believed he'd had his one good thing and had been wrong about that, and was only now, carefully, beginning to understand it. I'm going to find my own apartment, she said, in the city. I need my own place. I need that. It's not negotiable. I've been living in borrowed rooms my whole life, and I need something that's mine. Yes, he said. No argument. And I'm going to rebuild my client base independently. My credentials will be clear by end of week, and I have enough documentation of the work I've done here to establish a strong portfolio. I'll provide references, he said, to anyone you need. And she stopped. And I'd like to have dinner when February is done, in a restaurant somewhere in the city where neither of us has anything to manage or fix or document. She held his gaze. A dinner. Something happened on his face. Slow, deliberate, unmistakable. Not the corner of the mouth thing, the full thing, all of it, breaking the surface after 50 years of being kept mostly below it. A dinner, he said. To start. Yes, he said. To start. The snow outside the kitchen window was deep and bright and completely still. Her parents came to the estate on a Thursday in the 3rd week of December. Both of them, this time. Her mother in the camel coat and her father in the Volvo, and they came together, and they did not look like the people who had stood at the front of a cathedral and let their daughter find out about her own replacement by walking into it. They looked like 2 people in their late 50s who had spent a month discovering that the structures they had built their lives on were not load-bearing in the way they had believed. Claire met them in the front sitting room, not with Vincent, not with Mrs. Darrow, alone. Her mother sat with her hands in her lap and her back very straight, and her face doing something Claire had not seen it do before, which was not managing. Margaret Whitmore had been managing things for so long that the absence of it looked almost like illness. The slack in her expression, the way her eyes moved without their usual sharp calculation, the small, uncertain line of her mouth. The house is settled, her father said. He was looking at the floor. The guarantee situation. We were told it's been resolved. Yes, Claire said. I don't know how to... He stopped, started again. I know what you did to make that happen, and I know what it cost you. It cost me 23 days of work, she said. That's what it cost me. I want you to be clear about that, Dad. I didn't forgive a debt. I settled a situation that was threatening my professional standing, and your situation was adjacent to mine. I did not rescue you. He nodded. The house is yours, she said. The guarantee is gone. You still have the underlying debt to Holt's investment vehicle, which is restructured now into a standard loan at market rate. You can service it if you make the changes I outlined to your expense structure. She had sent them a memo the week before. 6 pages. She had not been gentle with the numbers. If you follow that plan, you'll be solvent in 4 years. 4 years, her mother said. Yes. That's... Her mother stopped. Her hands moved in her lap, a small gesture that had no destination. It's not what you're used to, Claire said. I know that. We weren't... Her mother started again. Her voice was different, lower. The armor of it was thinner than Claire had ever heard it. We weren't trying to destroy you, Claire. You have to understand that. We made a decision that was wrong, and we made it because we were frightened, and because... Her voice stopped, resumed. Because we believed you were strong enough to absorb it. I know, Claire said. That's the worst part. I know you believe that. Her mother looked at her, really looked. Not the assessing look, not the managing look, but the look underneath those, the one that existed before either of them had learned to protect themselves. Are you angry at us? Claire thought about it honestly. I was, she said. I'm not sure what I am now. I think I'm finished. I'm finished with the version of our relationship where I absorb things so you don't have to feel them. That version is done. Whatever comes after that, I'm willing to try to find. But not yet. Not yet, her mother said. You'll have your house, Claire said. You'll have the plan. I'll be reachable by phone if there's an actual emergency. Beyond that, we'll figure out what the rest looks like as time goes on. She stood. That's what I have right now. Her parents stood. Her father was looking at her with the expression she'd seen in the sitting room 3 weeks ago, the one she'd called recognition, and she saw it again now, more settled into his face, like something that had been sitting on the surface had been absorbed. You're different, he said. Yes, she agreed. Is it him? He meant Vincent, and he said it without hostility, just asking. She thought about it. About a man who had stood up when no one else moved and who had offered her a library and a salary and the specific dignity of being asked what she wanted. About what it felt like to be valued by someone who had no reason to value her except that he'd looked at her and seen what was there. Some of it, she said, most of it was already in me. I just stopped using it on people who didn't deserve it. Her father nodded once, the same nod he'd given in the sitting room, like he was filing it, permanently. Her mother hugged her at the door. Claire led her. She stood in the embrace of her mother's camel coat and her mother's perfume and her mother's arms, which were thinner than she remembered, and she put her own arms around her mother and felt the complicated weight of 58 years of a woman who had loved her imperfectly and managed her carelessly, and still, underneath all of it, somewhere under all the armor and the calculation, had sat at a kitchen table and cried for 2 hours. She held on for a moment. Then she let go. She watched the Volvo leave down the drive, and she stood at the door until it was gone, and then she went inside. Mrs. Darrow was in the hall with a look on her face that was not an expression exactly, but was the specific quality of attention that meant she had heard most of that and had decided it had gone all right. Tea, she said. Yes, Claire said, please. Christmas came to the estate quietly. Madeline had been talking to a therapist twice a week and was beginning to look more like herself, which was to say she was beginning to look less like someone who had been walking carefully around the edges of her own personality. She laughed at dinner one evening, a real laugh, full and unguarded, and Claire looked up from her plate and felt something ease in her chest that she hadn't realized was tight. Vincent was in and out. There were meetings she didn't ask about, and calls that happened behind closed doors, and twice in the second week of December. Sal drove him somewhere and didn't come back with him for 6 hours. She didn't ask. She understood that the walk he was finishing had its own texture and its own pace, and that the pace was not hers to set. He was always back by dinner. On Christmas Eve, Mrs. Darrow made a meal that required most of the kitchen and most of the day, and served it in the dining room, which was a room Claire had not been in before. It had a long table and dark wood paneling and candles that Mrs. Darrow lit without comment, and the 4 of them sat down to it, Vincent, Claire, Madeline, and Mrs. Darrow herself, who sat at the table without being asked, and was not thanked for it because Vincent had clearly understood for 18 years that she sat at the table and had organized the seating accordingly. It was not comfortable exactly. It was 4 people who had come to be in the same place through a series of events none of them had planned, eating a meal that was very good, in a room with candlelight and the particular quiet of a house that has been a single person's house for a long time and is trying to remember what it sounds like with more than one. But it was real. Whatever it was real. After dinner, Claire went to the garden. She wore the coat Mrs. Darrow had left on her chair, and she stood in the cold with the snow on the ground around her and the bare trees at the edges of the estate and the sky above very dark and very clear. And she looked up at it and thought about a woman standing outside a cathedral in November in a white dress with nowhere to go. She thought about ivory roses on a marble floor. She thought about Andrew's hands folded in his lap, about her father's back turned, about the organ music muffled through the stone walls, about her knees giving and the specific sound of the bouquet hitting the floor. She thought about a hand closing around her arm. Easy. Take a second. Footsteps on the snow behind her. She didn't turn around. She knew the weight of them. Vincent stood beside her, not too close, not performing the distance either. He had his hands in his jacket pockets, and he was looking at the same sky. How much longer? She asked. She meant the 2 remaining obligations. She had not asked directly before. She was asking now. 6 weeks, he said. Maybe 8. February, she said. February, he confirmed. She looked at the stars. There were more of them visible than she had ever seen from the city, and she still wasn't fully used to it. When Eleanor died, she said, "What was the hardest part?" He was quiet for a moment. "The ordinary things," he said. "Not the grief. The grief I understood, I knew what that was. It was the ordinary things. Coming home and the light in the kitchen being off. The particular way she made coffee, her shoes next to the door." A pause. "For 2 years I kept her shoes next to the door." She stood with that. "What moved them?" she asked. "Mrs. Darrow," he said. "On a day when I wasn't home. She moved them without asking, and when I came home they were gone. And I stood in the hallway for 10 minutes, and then I went on." He was looking at the sky. "She understood that I wasn't going to do it myself." "Mrs. Darrow understands a great deal." "She does," he agreed. They stood in the snow and the cold and the specific Christmas Eve quiet of a place far enough from the city that nothing external was making noise. "I'm going to look at apartments in January," Claire said. "I have 3 showings already scheduled, 1 in the South End, 2 in Cambridge." "I know," he said. "You mentioned it. I'm saying it again." "I heard it both times." She turned and looked at him in the dark, at the gray of his hair and the lines in his face and the lake water eyes, and she thought about 23 days in a library that had belonged to a woman she'd never met. And she thought about a fire in a garden and a door at the end of a hallway and a kitchen table in the early morning and the specific quality of being with someone who didn't need to fill silence to prove they were comfortable in it. "I need you to know something," she said. "All right." "I came here with nothing," she said. "No apartment, no job, no plan. I walked out of that cathedral with flowers on the floor behind me and a borrowed arm to hold on to and nothing else." She held his gaze. "Everything I have now I built. The documentation, the strategy, the work. I built all of it, and I need that to be something I own. I need to know I didn't build it on someone else's floor and call it mine." "You built it," he said. "I gave you a desk. You built what went on it." "I need to believe that." "It's true," he said. "Whatever comes next between us, it's still true. The work is yours. I didn't build it, and I couldn't have built it. I watched you build it." He looked at her steadily. "I don't need your gratitude. I need you to understand that they're separate things." She breathed. The cold came into her lungs and went out again in a thin cloud. "Okay," she said. "Okay?" "Both things can be true," she said. "I built the work and you made it possible to build it. Both of those things are true and neither of them cancels the other." He was quiet. "That's what I've been trying to work out," she said, "for 3 weeks. Whether accepting help means the work belongs to the person who helped. And the answer is no, the work is still mine." She looked at him. "And so is the choice about what comes next." "Yes," he said. "It is." She turned back to the sky. He did not leave. She did not ask him to. They stood in the snow for another few minutes, and then the cold became the kind of cold that requires going inside, and they went inside, and Mrs. Darrow had left the kitchen light on. February came. Claire had an apartment in Cambridge by then, 2nd floor, 2 bedrooms, a window over the street that let in the kind of morning light she hadn't realized she'd been missing. She had 2 clients of her own, a third in discussion, and her credentials restored and fully active and documented clean. She had a coffee maker that was hers, and a set of dishes she'd chosen, and a pair of curtains she'd hung herself badly, with a level that turned out to be slightly broken, so the left one hung 2 degrees off, and she'd decided she didn't care. Madeline had moved into a studio in Brookline, small and bright, on a street with a bakery on the corner. Her divorce had finalized on January 19th. She had started a design course at a community center on Tuesday nights, which she mentioned with the tentative pride of someone discovering that they have an interest in something that has nothing to do with anyone else's expectations. Their parents were in the house in Chestnut Hill. The debt was restructuring. Her father had taken a consulting position with a smaller firm and was working for the first time in 4 years without someone else's money holding him up. Her mother had, improbably, started volunteering at a literacy organization on Wednesday mornings. Claire knew this because Madeline mentioned it, not because her mother had told her. She was still working out the distance. She was giving herself permission to take her time. Andrew had not called again after Madeline relayed his message. She thought about him occasionally. Not with longing, not with fury, just with the flat, final clarity of someone looking back at a road they had walked down and understanding why they'd stopped. She didn't miss him. She missed sometimes the version of herself who had believed she was going to be chosen first. The woman in the months before the wedding who had let herself think, this is it. This is finally it. She was gentle with that woman when she thought about her. She did not tell her she'd been stupid. She told her she'd been trying her best with what she had. The dinner was on the 7th of February. A restaurant in the South End. Not flashy, not performing anything, just a good room with good food and enough noise around the edges that the silence between them when it came would be comfortable rather than conspicuous. She was there first. She had been there for 4 minutes when he came in, and she watched him cross the room toward her table and thought about the first time she'd seen him, crouching on a cathedral floor, unhurried, asking her a question she hadn't been asked in years. He sat down across from her. She looked at him. He looked at her. "You look different," he said. "Good different or bad different?" "Just different," he considered. "Less weight." "I hung my own curtains," she said. "They're crooked." "Did you fix them?" "No," she said. "I decided I didn't care." Something moved across his face, the thing that had been at the corner of his mouth since the beginning and was now simply part of his expression, integrated, visible. "The 2 obligations," he said, "concluded last week." "I know. You called. I wanted you to know it was done." "I know that too." They ordered. The waiter came and went, and the restaurant moved around them with the warm noise of an ordinary evening, other tables with other people, the low hum of a city going about its business on a February night. And she sat across from this man who had caught her when she fell and thought about what it cost to start over, and whether it was worth it, and knew, as she had known increasingly over the preceding weeks, that the answer to the second question was not a thing she could know in advance, and was not a thing she needed to know in advance. "I've been thinking about what you said," she told him, "in the garden, about Eleanor, about the ordinary things being the hardest." He looked at her. "I think that's the part people get wrong," she said. "When they talk about moving on, they think it's about the big things, the grief, the anger, the decisions. But the ordinary things are where you actually live. The light in the kitchen, the shoes by the door." She held his gaze. "I want to be someone's ordinary thing, not their grand gesture, not the woman they rescued from a cathedral floor, just someone's ordinary Tuesday." The restaurant noise moved around them. "Tuesday is my least structured day," he said. She laughed, properly, fully. He watched her do it. "I'm not easy to know," he said when she'd stopped laughing. "I want to say that plainly. I don't move fast and I don't talk easily, and there are parts of what I've been that I'm still working out how to put down." "I know," she said, "and you're 34 years old and you've spent your whole life taking care of other people's disasters, and the last thing I want to be for you is another thing you manage." "Then don't be," she said simply. He looked at her. "It's a choice," she said. "You make it every day. I make it every day." She turned her wine glass slightly on the table. "I'm not going to manage you. I'm also not going to need you to be uncomplicated. I've known complicated my whole life. I know the difference between complicated and worth it." "How do you know I'm worth it?" She thought about it honestly. About a man who read late at night and fed birds in the garden and had spent 6 years converting a criminal fortune into something he could look at in daylight. About a man who cleared a room because he wanted to see if he could walk past it and then found himself at its door 3 times in the first week she used it. About a man who stood up when no one else moved and then had the decency to ask her what she wanted before he assumed she wanted anything. "Because," she said, "when I was on the floor, everyone else was deciding how not to be involved. You were deciding how to help." She held his gaze across the table. "That's not nothing. That's actually everything." He was quiet for a long time. The food came. They ate. They talked about her Cambridge apartment and the crooked curtains and his Gloucester property that she'd recommended selling and that he had, it turned out, decided to keep. He told her why, and she listened and didn't argue, and afterwards she said, "That's not a financial decision." "No," he agreed. "I stand by the memo." "I know you do." She looked at him across the plates and the glasses and the ordinary furniture of an ordinary dinner and thought about the distance between November and February, between a marble floor and a restaurant table, between the woman who had pressed ivory roses into her own hands, walking toward a ceremony that had already been stolen from her, And the woman sitting here now, with her own apartment and her own clients and her own curtains hanging slightly wrong and no one to answer to but herself. The woman at the beginning of that distance had believed that if she gave enough, eventually the ledger would balance, that love operated on accounting principles, that the surplus she'd been generating her whole life would someday be returned. She knew now that was not how it worked, that some people operated ledgers that were never designed to balance in your direction, and that understanding that was not defeat, it was arithmetic. It was simply seeing the books clearly. She had become, in the end, very good at seeing books clearly. "My father asked me something," she said. "When he came to the estate, he asked if the change in me was because of you." "What did you say?" "I said some of it." She set her fork down. "But I think I was wrong. I think what you did was, you didn't change me. You just didn't need me to be smaller than I was. And I'd spent so long making myself smaller that I'd forgotten what the other size felt like." She looked at him. "You gave me a room and a desk and a problem and said fix it. You didn't tell me how. You didn't manage what I found. You just let me work." A pause. "I don't think you understand what that was worth to me." "Tell me," he said. She looked at him for a moment, at the gray in his hair and the lines in his face and the steady lake water eyes that didn't look away. "It was the first time," she said, "that I did something completely, and no one told me I should have done it differently." The restaurant moved around them. The candle on the table burned down a centimeter. Someone at the next table laughed at something, and the sound moved through the warm air and dissipated. Vincent Callahan looked at Claire Whitmore across the ordinary furniture of an ordinary dinner and said nothing for a long moment, and then said quietly and without performance, "Then let me tell you now. Everything you did, from the first morning with the books, to the phone call with Holt, to the conversation with your father, to the way you talked to your sister when she had nowhere else to go. Everything. You did not do any of it wrong." She looked down at the table, pressed her lips together, looked back up. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he agreed. They finished dinner. He walked her to her car on the street outside, and they stood on the sidewalk in the February cold, and she thought about another sidewalk in November in a white dress and ivory roses and everything that had come from a single door closing behind her. "Same time next week?" she said. "Tuesday," he said. "Your least structured day." She smiled. Not the performed smile, not the managing smile, the real one, the one that came from somewhere uncomplicated and went where it wanted. "Tuesday," she agreed. She got in her car and drove home to Cambridge. She went up to the second floor and hung her coat on the hook by the door and stood in the kitchen with the light on and made herself a cup of tea and stood at the window that looked over the street, watching the February night go about its business below. The curtains hung slightly crooked on either side of the window. She had looked at them every day for 3 weeks and felt every day the same thing, a small, private, uncomplicated satisfaction. They were hers. The crookedness was hers. The 2 degrees off were hers. Nobody had hung them for her, and nobody had straightened them after, and they were exactly as right or as wrong as she had made them. She stood at the window with the tea warming her hands, and she thought about the woman who had been replaced at her own wedding and had believed, standing outside in the cold, that she had reached the end of something. She thought about what it felt like to believe your life is over, and to be completely wrong about that. The city moved below her window. She drank her tea. She was 34 years old, and she had a crooked curtain and a Tuesday dinner and a library she'd worked in for 23 days that would always be in some private part of her, hers. She had a sister who was building something. She had parents who were paying their own bills for the first time in 4 years. She had credentials and clients and a plan that was her own, built on her own terms, executed on her own timeline. She had not been rescued. She had been given a desk and a problem and the room to solve it. The rest she had done herself. That was the truth of it, and the truth of it was enough, more than enough. It was everything. It was the whole of what she had spent 34 years trying to locate in other people's approval, and had finally, in the wreckage of a cathedral floor, begun to find in the only place it had ever actually lived. She finished her tea. She went to bed. She slept.